But I wonder if you might be able to try and inject a little bit of optimism into an old cynic like me.
I will do my best, and if I don't succeed this time, then we can try again the next time.
Okay.
Uh, Look, first of all, I agree with the facts. I agree with the facts that are the basis of your analysis. There's no question that the year 2020 saw a cultural revolution, a very successful one so far.
Hello and welcome to Recent UK with me, Darren Grimes. Please do consider hitting that little subscribe button and the notification bell if you enjoy today's show. And I'm absolutely certain that you will, because I'm joined today by Yoram Hazony, the host of the National Conservatism podcast. Now, I am advertising my competition here, but it is a very, very good podcast and you should definitely check it out. Yoram is the author of The Philosophy of Hebrew Scripture and, crucially for our discussion today, author of The Virtue of Nationalism, which I have here. And let's stop the housekeeping, get the man himself on. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, Darren. Good to see you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. How's life in Jerusalem right now? There are reports you guys might be heading for a third lockdown.
That's not what people are talking about. They're talking about the fact that we might be going into a fourth election in 2 years.
Yes, politics is pretty volatile. We thought politics was volatile here in the United Kingdom since our vote for Brexit, but you guys have had it pretty tough.
Yeah, I think actually that the Israelis were inspired by the volatility after Trump in America and after Brexit in the UK. They just got jealous and decided that we have to have strange, wacko politics here as well.
Now, speaking of the United Kingdom, you've said elsewhere that the UK is more parallel to the people of Israel than any other nation that you know of. I wonder if we might start by asking you to explain why you believe this to be the case.
Well, the British, the English and the British, to a certain extent, the Dutch, even the French, the Swiss, there are quite a few nations in Europe that imagine themselves, considered themselves, thought of themselves as independent Christian nations based on their reading of the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament. And this identification with the Old Testament is something that sets aside a number of nationalities in Europe. It is most parallel, I think, to the English of all the nations in Europe, for the simple reason that the English, for most of the last 800-900 years, have developed their own indigenous legal tradition, the common law tradition, which was always considered to be, by the English, considered to be the best form of law, but not necessarily a universal law, something that is peculiar and special to the English and that give the English their freedoms. And of course, the UK in general inherits the overall structure of a kind of a federation of four nations, but still the English spirit is at the basis of the British Constitution. And for many of these centuries, famous English authors, you can think of Fortescue, Hooker, Coke, Selden, Blackstone, and Hale, and onward to Burke and beyond. For many of those centuries, the parallel between ancient Israel and even between the Jews and England was something that was a central part of the English heritage, which gives rise to anthems like Jerusalem, which I, of course, first heard as a boy through the Emerson, Lake and Palmer version, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's an extraordinarily stirring tribute to England as Jerusalem, England as a kind of latter-day Christian version of the ancient Jewish state.
Now, in the book, you speak a lot about the nation state being the best vehicle to run a policy. And I wonder if you might tell us if that explains why you were so supportive of Brexit, which, as I mentioned, for the past, since 2016, has been a source of much debate and angst in our country. And for a lot of people, revealed just how large an extent we have outsourced our governance and just rendered ourselves completely inept and unable to actually elect those who are capable of having the guts and the courage to actually lead this country.
Look, I think Brexit is crucial. I think it's crucial for the UK. I say this as an outsider, but I also think that Brexit is crucial for many other democratic nations, because the fundamental impulse underlying Brexit is that there should be no kind of continent-wide or universal government based in Brussels, which makes the decisions for the English people and for the British people about how they are going to lead their lives and according to which laws. I just mentioned a moment ago that the English common law tradition is a unique and glorious tradition. It's not simply something that's unique to England, but it's also something that the nations of the world have never ceased to learn from. The English common law has always been a model for nations seeking independence and freedom and good government. And I see Brexit as a return to the traditional English constitution, which was a constitution in which the English people made their own laws, and the British people made their own laws, and French made their laws, and the Germans made their laws, and the French and Germans didn't make laws for Britain. That's a crucial model to return to our world, the model of a self-determining independent national state. And Brexit is the most dramatic, most clear statement of the yearning of modern nations to continue to be free as they have been.
Now, in your book as well, you argue that it's not just the European Union, but indeed the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, multilateral organizations, basically all of these organizations with an acronym, they get a good kicking in your book. And I wonder if you might just elaborate and explain why you are so skeptical of what many would argue, well-meaning liberals would argue, is just collective action for the common good.
Well, look, you can make this argument on two different levels. It's possible to discuss the utter folly and craziness that is the United Nations or many other international organizations, which in general end up being hijacked by an alliance between sort of starry-eyed utopians in the West and people from the developing world who are not necessarily supportive of democracy. But my book is not primarily about kicking these institutions. My book is primarily about making an argument of principle. And the argument in principle distinguishes between an order of independent nations in which different nations are free to pursue their own course, not only their own interests, but their own legal systems, their own arrangements with respect to religion, their own traditions. And nations are free to compete with one another, meaning that the English can decide they want to copy the Dutch who've invented the stock market because they think that it works well, but they don't have to. The choice is up to them. Each nation will becomes an experiment in what the best form of government is for them, and then other nations can copy it. In the book, I draw a fundamental distinction between that aspiration, the aspiration to achieve a world of independent nations, and the imperial ideal. Imperialism is an ancient ideal. People today don't really understand that imperialists all the way back to antiquity, thought that they had very good reasons for creating world empire under a single rule of a single law. The argument is almost always the same. Going all the way back to antiquity, the argument is the reason we need world government or world governance, a single rule of law to wrap the entire planet, is to bring peace and prosperity to the nations. And so on the one hand, if you think you know how to rule the world, if you think you have the one eternal final answer to how to bring peace and prosperity to the earth, if you believe in that, you have that kind of vision, so you think you're justified in going out and conquering all of the nations of the world and suppressing their own traditions and their ways of living in order to bring about your universal vision. So I argue that we're faced with a choice between one ideal, which let's say it's the ideal of the Roman Empire, of a universal government that knows what's right for everyone, and a world of independent nations in which we're a bit more humble and skeptical, and we say, look, nobody's that smart, and if you put all that power in the hands of one world empire, or something that aspires to be a world empire, then it could very well end up, and usually does, like the Roman Empire ended up as something crazy, which fights endless wars to oppress and suppress peoples rather than permitting their self-determination and their freedom.
I'm interested in exploring this idea of competition. I believe competition, as do you, that competition is an inherently good thing. The diversity of Europe, for example, as far as nation states are concerned, the fact that the United Kingdom is very much different to Germany, etc., is a good thing. We all learn from each other. We copy each other's ideas and grow that way. But conservatives tend, whilst we are accepting of competition and believe it to be part of being human, we also are skeptical of government. We're skeptical of the nation state, aren't we? And that's what makes us conservative. So why elevate the nation state so that it starts to become foreign to the conservative tradition? And because I think a lot of the proponents, like Trump, for example, he wasn't, at least in the last 4 years of his time in office, a traditional conservative, for example, that wants to slim down the size of the state. He's actually been spending quite a lot of money. So I wonder if that sort of skepticism of government, is that part of the strengthening of the nation state in your eyes?
Well, look, it's obviously possible to mix and match these different pieces, and and create different kinds of political ideologies. I like to try to take the Hebrew Bible as the touchstone and the fountainhead for Western conservatism, especially for English conservatism. And if we take the original combination that we see in the Bible, reading the Bible now as a political document, what we see is, on the one hand, Moses and ancient Israel. They believe that they're in touch with the God, creator of heaven and earth. They think that they have a message to all mankind. On the other hand, the Bible is the first document in which we find borders, and ancient Israel is commanded not to cross its borders and not to trouble the neighboring states, because they have a right to their own land and their own way of doing things. Okay, so there you have the nationalist message, and side by side with that, there is a deep skepticism of government. There is no parallel in ancient Greece or ancient Rome to the assault on the power of kings, and that appears throughout the throughout Hebrew Bible through the writings of the prophets. The idea that a nation is free by freeing itself from world empire is parallel to the idea that families and clans and tribes and individuals can be free by limiting the power of the central government. Okay, you don't have to accept those two things together, but I think that they go best together. The skepticism of world government goes with the skepticism of national government. And by the way, it also goes with the skepticism of private corporations when they get to be so powerful that they become like an oppressive government. Right? The thread that you're referring to in Anglo-American conservative tradition is skeptical of all power, all worldly, earthly powers that reach the position where they can claim a kind of monopoly to decide how everything should be for everyone. So when we get to talking about characters like President Trump, Boris Johnson, Viktor Orban, Bolsonaro, we can keep going. There's all sorts of political figures, Salvini, political figures who have taken up the mantle of fighting against European empire, fighting against liberal internationalism, globalism, world empire. All of these figures are complicated. They're all outsiders. None of them come from within the established political structures. And as outsiders, they have, let's say, interesting personalities. They are not necessarily traditionalists, although you may notice that every one of the people that I've mentioned in the end has sought an alliance with national and religious tradition in order to try to build a coalition. But even setting that aside, you're right that these are not classical conservative characters because what they're revolting against is at least 30 years, at least, you can say more, but at least 30 years since 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and 1992, the Treaty of Maastricht, at least a full generation in which the establishment, Democrats and Republicans, Tories and Labour, all the major parties across Europe, all of them were liberal internationalists. They argued about all sorts of things, but all of them were agreed on this one idea, that the entire world should be subject to a new world order, that there should be one rule of law that's going to wrap the entire earth, and that the independence of nations has run its course and should gradually be eliminated. Okay, all the parties in Europe and America supported that program. And so the revolt against it, the rebellion against it is being run by people who are not necessarily traditional conservatives, but they certainly are conserving at least one classical traditional idea, which is the independence of the nation. And I think you'll find that what we're going to see in the coming years, as the fight between liberal internationalists, who, by the way, are increasingly not liberal, certainly in America and in Britain, increasingly Marxist colored, these liberal internationalists in the direction that they're going. But setting that aside for a moment, I think we're going to be seeing in the coming years, as the fight between liberal internationalism and national conservatism becomes more established, and national conservatives become a stronger and more established force, I think you'll see increasingly establishment characters who will be thinking in a more consistent way. And the consistent way to think about it is that the independence of a nation like Britain goes hand in hand with its national traditions, with its religious traditions, which includes a powerful concern for the rights of the individual, especially property, but also freedom of speech and others. I think that's the direction we're going to go.
Well, I hope you're right on that latter point, because I certainly don't know about Israel's position on this, but free speech in this country, as it is in the United States of America, is under attack like never before. Certainly not in my 27 years on this earth. But some have argued that nationalism is pretty deadly in excessive quantities. And obviously, in this book, you argue it's a positive force for good. Now, some might say, oh, well, Mr. Hazony, shouldn't we love and care for everyone equally and not have preferences between groups of people? Shouldn't we focus on our commonalities and not our differences? Isn't there a time and a place for both of these things? Does one come before the other? Because I'll just give you an example. I remember I campaigned for Brexit, and as soon as we won, I had a message from a member of the Queen's Council, and she said, well, Darren, I hope you're happy. This was on Twitter publicly. You're the right age for a small war. She genuinely believed that the vote for Brexit would mean that we go to war with Europe, and that's the sort of, that's what we're dealing with here. That's what the response is when you say, well, actually, I quite like the nation state, and I certainly think that we should defend it.
Well, there's a lot of questions there. Let's begin with the question of whether too much nationalism is evil. Okay, which is a very good question. It's completely reasonable. The argument that I make in the book is that no political theory, right, no theory of political order is good enough to prevent human beings from being corrupt and evil. Right? I'm not a utopian. The book isn't utopian, and so you shouldn't read me as saying that an order of independent nations or a world of independent nations is some kind of utopia that's going to make human beings good, universally good in a way that they've never been before. I don't believe any such thing. The only question that my book addresses, and it's a big one, is given that the independent nation states are subject to evil and abuse, and given that empires, that imperial states that seek to govern as many nations as possible, that they are subject to evil and abuse, and that the alternative to those two systems is an order of clans and tribes, of families and clans anarchically leading an independent life and conducting their own foreign policies. That order is also subject to evils and abuse. The fact is that we do not know of any form of political order that cannot be abused and turned to evil. So we're setting this aside. We don't have a formula for bringing utopia to the earth. So we have to choose from the models that are known to us. And the argument of the book is that the independent nation sits in the balance between tribal order, which is a kind of an anarchy, where every tribe fights every other tribe, and between world government, where the goal is to have some kind of institution which dictates the law to the entire world. The order of nation states sits in the balance between those two extremes. And because it sits in the balance, I argue that it is preferable to the extremes. In a tribal anarchy, as far as the kind of thing that you see in Syria, where the state collapses and crumbles down to the level of extended families fielding their own armies. That kind of an order is too violent to allow civilization to arise. It's a good kind of order if what you want is perpetual warfare at your doorstep. Imperial order seeks to eliminate that kind of violence by force, by coming up with one ideology and imposing it on the entire world. And I show in the book that every major war, I mean, the really big wars that really frighten us, I'm talking about the 30 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, World War I, World War II, the threat of war during the Cold War, all of these are wars in which an imperialist ideology sets out to conquer the world. And part of my argument is that that nation states tend to be more skeptical. Sure, there are plenty of people who think my nation is the best, but as long as they can remember that their goal is not to rule the world, their goal is self-determination for their own people and to leave others alone, as long as they can remember that, then the order of independent nations will always be better. Well, let's not say always, will generally be better than imperial order. So the argument is not that nationalism is an absolute way of perfecting ourselves. It is not. The argument is that it is simply preferable to every alternative that we know of.
Mm. Because you mentioned there about in your response before the last, about the evolution of where we're at, I guess, with what you could coin Trumpism, and indeed our vote for Brexit, which you deem to be welcome examples of American and British voters reasserting national sovereignty. Now, I wonder if you could just reflect for a moment on the fact that Mr. Trump has been booted out of office. Are the ideas you espouse in the book on the way out? I mean, how do you think this evolution will manifest itself?
Oh, no. These ideas are not on their way out. I mean, people are going to have to take a look at the book and judge for themselves. But it's very important to distinguish that there's one level of looking at history where we see it as a struggle between different kinds of ideas. And there's another way of looking at history which is equally valid and equally true, where we see it as a contest among individual persons and that rise and fall and are constantly winning and losing battles and winning and losing elections. I think your audience can understand that sometimes there are decisive battles or wars or elections in which an entire ideology is so thoroughly defeated that it can't rise again. That does happen sometimes. Okay, but on the other hand, that's pretty rare. Most of the time, when somebody loses an election or loses a battle, what happens is that both sides then regroup, and then they come back and they re-engage again. Very often sometimes with the same leaders, very often with new leaders. One of the things that a nation can learn from losing an election can be that the idea is the right idea, but the person was the wrong person. I'm not claiming that with respect to Trump. I'm just saying that the fact that Trump lost an election tells us nothing about the fortune of nationalism. Nationalism in the English-speaking world appeared seemingly out of nowhere in 2016 to win these two breathtaking upsets, Brexit and the Trump election. And those ideas are now circulating. My book is one book, but there are many, many books and many, many magazines and television programs and many simple people who are attracted to the idea of national independence in a way now that 15 or 20 years ago no one could have imagined. On a weekly, almost on a daily basis, receive emails from America, from the UK, and from around the world, from young people who are drawn to the idea of national independence, national traditions, and by the way, also the cooperation of independent nations to struggle against empire. And these young people, there are many thousands of them, and they've been shaped by what we've seen in these last few years. I don't know who's going to win the next election in America or who's going to win the next election in the UK. But I can promise you that for the coming generation, young people will be shaped by this dream of reasserting and restoring British national independence, and they'll be studying the history of independent Britain and rethinking their relationship to the English language, the common law, Anglican religion, the Bible. All of this is taking place. It's going to take years to unfold, but it's happening.
Yes, I mean, you speak about biblical nationalism, and I wonder, I as an Anglican myself, I really, I wish that were true, that there would be this revival of wanting to respect and cherish the traditions of the church, and the established church, no less, let's not forget. But haven't we outgrown some elements of biblical nationalism that you mention and speak about, and the way in which, you know, these values are indeed championed at the very heart of the Bible? Are you advocating for all parts of it, or are there certain parts where you think, well, actually that doesn't apply anymore? Or do you think we can actually still rely on that most holy of books and rely on the text quite faithfully?
Darren, you have a wonderful list of questions. I'm really enjoying it. God bless you. This is just terrific. Look, again, the Hebrew Bible, which I defend, and Jewish tradition more generally, the Christian tradition, which I have great respect for and see in many ways as allied to Judaism. These are also institutions that are run by people. And again, if we're not thinking in utopian terms, but we're being conservatives and we're being realistic, then we have to understand that that these currents of rising and falling, they have all sorts of things to do with, with who's in charge. And it may be that at this moment, this particular moment, the Anglican Church does not have appropriate leadership, is maybe not even familiar with.
You can say that again.
Of the Bible sufficiently to be able to teach this generation of the greatness and the grandeur of Scripture. It may be that they're even embarrassed, that they've been affected by woke ideas or revolutionary ideas, and they're embarrassed, and they see when some of the churchmen look at the Bible, perhaps they say to themselves, well, look, this book isn't politically correct. This book teaches attachment to one's own family, one's own nation, outdated ideas like marriage between man and woman, skepticism about all sorts of sexual innovations that today are held to be freedom, but in those days were not. Concern for the land, concern for God. I mean, even God may be embarrassing to some of the clergy who no longer understand what it was all about. So those of us who feel that we do have some insight into these great traditions of Judaism and Christianity and of the Western nations, those of us who understand that it is these traditions that brought civilization ultimately to the entire world, we're going to have to do a lot of work in order to refocus those people who are rethinking. There's probably 100 million people in Europe and America right now, at least, who are rethinking, and we have to. It's our job to reintroduce them to the significance and the importance of the Bible. So let me just quickly touch on two things that came up in one of my recent podcasts, where I had Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a courageous liberal crusader for the freedom of men and women who are oppressed by extremist Islam. And she was on my program, and we were talking about the question of whether it's possible to have a reformation of Islam, right? So those people are interested, you can go look at the video, but I made the following proposal, which I propose here as well. It's difficult to imagine, although I wish all Muslim nations and peoples well, but it's difficult to imagine a reformation of Islam for the simple reason that Islam does not have the Bible. It doesn't. The Muslims decided at an early stage that the Bible was corrupt, and so they rejected the Hebrew Bible and also the New Testament as sacred scripture for Muslims. And as a consequence of this rejection, there are certain ideas which have been working on shaping Christian and Jewish societies for thousands of years, which are not immediately easy for Islam to assimilate. I'll mention just two. One of them is the idea that all human beings are in the image of God and therefore deserve to be treated as fundamentally bearing that image and an intrinsic dignity. That is something that has no Greek source. It has no Roman source. It only enters into the West through the Hebrew Bible. And similarly, the idea, the dream of independent nations that are free from imperial conquest, but are nonetheless able to make peace between themselves, among themselves. That ideal, that aspiration has no Greek source. It has no Roman source. It also has no source in the Quran. And so what we're asking when we think about bringing these kinds of ideas, that every man and woman is created in God's image, that a world of independent nations aspiring to peace amongst themselves is better than any other political order. These and many other kinds of ideas have their source in the Bible, in Jewish and in Christian scripture. And I think that when people get into this process of rethinking their relationship to their nation, which is happening, they will also come to ask themselves, were my grandparents and my great-grandparents and my ancestors going back so many centuries, right, in Britain at least 1,000 years, were they just foolish because they embraced the Bible? Or did they understand something that I don't fully understand yet? And when people ask that question, they'll reread the texts. And when they reread the texts, they will begin to see things that they have not seen before. And I have a hope that there will be a revival within the Anglican Church, which will be more authentic than some of the phenomena that we've seen in recent years.
Absolutely, you and I both. Now, could you just explain how taking an imperialist worldview essentially actually distorts the perspective, in your eyes, of Israel and the Israel-Palestine conflict, for example? That's one thing that you've argued.
Sure. Let's begin with the idea of liberal internationalism. Okay, liberal internationalism is an extrapolation of liberalism. Liberalism is the view that we know everything we need to know about governing societies and indeed governing the world if we're focused just about exclusively on the freedom and the equality of the individual. Let's call that liberalism. And so this liberalism is a universal ideal. It claims that all nations at all times in history should have the same, more or less the same kind of government. If Afghanistan has a government which does not respect the liberty and equality of the individual the same way that those liberties and equalities are respected in the UK or in America, then their government is evil and they should be overthrown. Okay, and the same is true for all other countries. Excuse me. So that's liberal internationalism. Now, liberal internationalists come to every conflict on the face of the globe. Excuse me, I'm just going to have to
absolutely
drink something here. Liberal internationalists come to every conflict on the face of the globe with this same formula. They say everybody is equal. All we need to do is to explain to them how liberalism works, and they will all use reason in order to discover liberalism. And then once they discover
Dalai Lama levels of Panglossian optimism, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. But that Panglossian optimism is precisely what characterized the claim that history had ended in 1989, which afflicted political leadership all through the democratic world, including
New World Order,
including in Israel, where the political left was led by a great statesman named Shimon Peres, who really was a great statesman, but who at this moment in history was swept up in the utopianism and published a book called The New Middle East, in which he argued for eliminating all the borders among nations and creating a single central EU-like government of Arabs and Jews and Persians and Turks throughout the Middle East. Right? I mean, it was really crazy. It was a time of craziness, and in which all political wisdom was simply abandoned in the favor of this theory. Just look at what they did with China. The idea of giving Hong Kong to China because China was about to become to join the liberal world order. I mean, looking back on it, we see that it's really craziness. Now, so
naivety.
It's naive, but it was led by people with a great deal of political experience who thought that they could see all the old rules by which the world had been governed collapsing and this new liberal utopia emerging for the entire planet. Now, so if we take that moment of utopianism and then sort of turn it on Israel and the Palestinians, what we see is just this kind of an ideology that says, look, obviously there are no intractable problems between Israel and its Arab neighbors. All we need to do is explain liberalism to them. The Israelis might be a little farther ahead, but they'll get it first. But then the Palestinians, within a few years, they'll also get it. And then Israelis and Palestinians will understand that there's no need for nationality, and there's no need for nation states. There's no need for borders, and there's no need for wars. All we need to do is join the world economy and have free movement of peoples, and everything will be fine, right? That's the ideology of the Oslo Accords. And we in Israel, we unfortunately experienced the collapse of that utopia more quickly than everybody else did. I mean, I guess you could say in a way that was good for Israel, but it was certainly horrific, because within less than a decade of the Oslo Accords, these Palestinian terrorists who had been brought in to adopt liberalism and reason started blowing up cafes and buses literally on a daily basis in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. And in Israel, the consequence of that is that within a few years, the political left in Israel simply disappeared. At the Labour Party in Israel, imagine this happening in the UK. The Labour Party in Israel, which promoted this utopia, has been erased from the political map in Israel as a consequence of the stupidity and folly of this adopting this liberal universalist worldview. Now along comes Donald Trump, who everyone almost everyone who is fashionable and PC and in the know, whether in London or in New York or in Los Angeles, thinks it makes sense to despise, and they ridicule him because he can't possibly understand anything about the way the political world works. This same Donald Trump made an offer to the Palestinians, got the same kind of response from the Palestinians that all the previous presidents had gotten from the Palestinians, and said, that's it. I'm no utopian. I'm going to be a realist. I'm going to run a realistic policy. And he says, is there any Arab in the Middle East who does want to make peace with the state of Israel instead of continuing war forever on nationalist terms, on terms that are not seeking to create some kind of universal utopia, but realist terms, mutual interests? And guess what? We've recently, in just the last few months, discovered that thanks to that shift in paradigm from a liberal internationalist paradigm to a nationalist paradigm, that there are at least 3 Arab countries so far, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and the Sudan, and apparently more coming, who were willing to say, you know what, on the basis of mutual interests, instead of liberal utopia, we do share certain interests with Israel. Let's explore it and let's sign peace deals. Mm-hmm. Surprise. The utopian dream of the liberal internationalists, you can't achieve it, but you can get closer to it in order of national states than you can with this liberal international nuttiness. How's that?
Beautifully put, beautifully put. I wonder if, to end then, you might try and inject, we're talking a lot about vaccines at the moment, inject a little bit of optimism into a cynical 27-year-old such as myself. You mentioned earlier about this idea of a revival of everything that we once held dear, not just in the United Kingdom, but I think across the West as well, actually. In a year in which we've seen statues torn down, we've seen attacks by those who wish to destroy and denigrate much of our history and what this country has long stood for. You know, I look at my ancestors, for example. My grandfather fought in the Korean War and fighting for the values that he believed, and I believe, that the United Kingdom's flag has long represented, which is freedom from tyranny in the north of Korea and of course democracy and all of these things that we consider to be vital. But we see, by what might be uncharitably deemed to be the miserablest millennials, an attack on freedom of expression, on freedom of association, on this push for collectivism, for universalist ideas. Certainly Jeremy Corbyn was very popular in this country with my generation. And I sort of think, well, maybe we don't have all that good a future to look forward to. Maybe actually these guys are listening far too often to those who, in the same way I would describe it as, if I know a friend has my best interests at heart, I would listen to them more likely. That's what I would argue a nation should do as well. If you know someone has your nation's best interests at heart, you should listen to them. You shouldn't listen to those who want to tear down your statues and tell you that you're some form of racist backwater because you voted to leave the supranational structures of the European Union or for President Trump. And I don't feel all that optimistic. And I don't mean to depress you, I really don't. And I fear I probably have. But I wonder if you might be able to try and inject a little bit of optimism into an old cynic like me.
I will do my best. And if I don't succeed this time, then we can try again the next time.
Okay.
Look, first of all, I agree with the facts. I agree with the facts that are the basis of your analysis. There's no question that the year 2020 saw a cultural revolution, a very successful one so far, that has stampeded through liberal institutions in America and in Britain. And when I say liberal institutions, I should emphasize that liberal institutions, whether the media, the universities, the philanthropies, the Hollywood, and most of the businesses as well, these great liberal institutions have dominated politics and culture in the English-speaking world and beyond since the 1960s. And you are absolutely right that what we have seen in 2020 is the overthrow of the traditional liberal framework within many, maybe most of these institutions, and the adoption of this new woke ideology, which, as I've written in my essay on the challenge of Marxism, is in fact, it is a descendant of Marxist revolution. We've seen the overthrow of liberalism through many of the most powerful institutions in the English-speaking world this year, and there is excellent reason to think that we are watching democracy in America and beyond teetering at the edge of a precipice. Right? That's the reality, that we really are on the brink. Okay, now I promise to try to give you some hope. So no, but let me begin the hope part with some skepticism. We human beings are very, very bad, terrible, in fact, at being able to project trends forward and predict what's going to happen. We're terrible at it. Almost no one predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union. Almost nobody predicted the collapse of the housing market and the international economy in 2008. Virtually no one predicted the rise of nationalism in 2016. Virtually no one predicted the German decision to open the floodgates to immigration from the Islamic world in 2015, and virtually no one foresaw 2020 and this shocking, astonishing successes of this new Marxist cultural revolution in America and the UK. Right, so this should teach you something. If we're pessimistic, in part it's because we're looking at the facts and we're taking them seriously. That's good. But it's in part because we're overestimating our ability to know what's about to happen. We don't know what's about to happen. The possibility of revolution collapse is real, but the possibility of a backlash and a restoration is real. The possibility that backlash and restoration may end up producing some kind of fascism that you and I would find detestable is real, but the possibility that it will create a responsible conservative revival is also real. Now, we just don't know which of these futures are actually going to happen. We have no way of knowing. What we do know is the direction that we have to work towards. We know that people like you, that you're not the only one, that there are hundreds and thousands of people, young people like you, who are rethinking. And if you look back at history, you'll see that you don't need millions of people like yourself in order to be able to turn the entire course of your nation's history. You need hundreds. You need hundreds of gifted people who think that this is the most important thing to do with their lives, who are creative and insightful, know where to find allies, and it's possible to do it. But please don't forget that whether you succeed or not is in God's hands. You have to do everything that's in your power to the edge of exhaustion. And in the end, right? In the end, this is also a central teaching of Scripture. In the end, when you're exhausted, the decision as to what's going to happen is going to remain with God. And if He thinks that our cause is righteous and just, then we will win in the end.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful way to end the show. Yoram Hazony, thank you very, very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now, obviously people should check out the book. I'll put a link in the description, but where can people actually find out more about the Edmund Burke Foundation?
I ask everybody to just take a look at the National Conservatism website, nationalconservatism.org, and you will find there an aggregator site that's sponsored by my organization, by the Edmund Burke Foundation, which is updated daily. It has new books, new essays, and new video content. And you can subscribe to get it in your email, or you can just go visit it. You can also look at our YouTube channel, National Conservatism, and I hope that you'll find things that you're looking for there.
Brilliant. Thank you again.
Thank you, Darren.
Now, I'm sure you'll be absolutely desperate to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell after that. Fascinating discussion. Please do let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll see you next time.